They told me, "If you show up, we may not open the door." That was the moment I realized my family had finally done what they'd only hinted at for years, officially shutting me out. I'm Maya Green, the dependable daughter who always fixed things and held the family together. But this Christmas, they chose to leave me out. And yet, I ended up saving them from losing everything. How did it all unfold? What happened when my absence shattered their perfect image? Stick with me, and you'll find out. Before we dive into the story, let me learn a bit about you. If you're a charming lady, please leave the number 1 in the comments, and if you're a dashing gentleman, leave the number 2. This way, I can send you a special greeting. Now, let's start the story together. They say holidays bring people together. That year, mine used it as a reason to leave me out. Christmas had always been the same. Every year, I'd arrive with my homemade pies and stories about my day-to-day life. I'd fix the broken garbage disposal at their house, reorganize the pantry, or refill their prescriptions. It was always the same. I was the steady one. The one who didn't need recognition, just the quiet peace of being there. Last year, I brought handmade pies and fixed the garbage disposal. This year, I wasn't even welcome at the door. The apartment was quiet when I stepped in. It wasn't large, but it was mine. The small Christmas tree stood in the corner, blinking faintly, one of the lights flickering in a rhythm that seemed more like a whisper than a twinkle. I hung my coat in the hallway and set down the bag of gifts I'd picked up that morning. Lavender balm for Mom, orange marmalade for Dad, and organic tea for Alyssa. I'd even wrapped them myself, carefully tying the ribbons, as I always did. I had just gotten home from work at the public benefits office. The day had been long, and my hands still felt cold from handling the paperwork. But the minute I crossed the threshold, the weight of my family's expectations seemed to follow me in. I hadn't even settled in yet when my phone rang. The screen lit up with Scott's name. "Hey, big brother," I said, trying to sound cheerful, kicking off my shoes. His voice came through soft, hesitant. "So, Alyssa's coming to Christmas this year," he began. "And, she's been working on some emotional boundaries." I frowned, the words not quite making sense. Scott cleared his throat before continuing. "With your job at the hospice, the energy stuff, it's just a lot for her sometimes, His tone was almost apologetic. "So, we were thinking maybe you could just take a break this year. You understand, right?" I sat down on the couch, the sudden weight of his words making the room feel smaller. "Okay," I barely managed to whisper. Before I could say anything more, the other line buzzed. My mother's name flashed across the screen. I answered it without thinking. "Sweetheart," she said in that syrupy sweet tone that always made my stomach churn a little. "We just want peace this year. You know how sensitive Alyssa is." I couldn't even bring myself to reply. It was like she was speaking a script I had heard 1,000 times before. "If you come to the house," she continued, her voice somehow warmer, "we may not open the door." My hands tightened around the phone, but I didn't speak. I just sat there, the silence filling the space between us. I realized something then. I wasn't really invited. I had never been. I was just the one who showed up year after year, hoping that this time would be different, hoping they would notice me. They never did. I hung up the phone without another word. The sound of the call ending felt final, like the last echo in an empty room. I didn't cry, I didn't shout, I didn't beg. I simply turned off the Christmas lights on my tiny tree. Then, without thinking, I opened my laptop. Not out of anger, but out of instinct. It's amazing how quickly your entire financial history with your family can vanish. 2 clicks at a time. The night was quieter than usual. I hadn't even noticed the soft snow falling outside until I looked up. The world beyond my window was blanketed in white, each flake floating lazily to the ground, an endless drift of silence. It felt like the world was giving me permission to breathe. But inside, the air felt heavy, full of the things unsaid. I sat at my small desk, the faint glow of the laptop reflecting on my face. Soft jazz played in the background, barely audible over the hum of the radiator. My mind, however, was louder than any music could drown out. The phone call earlier that evening had settled into the pit of my stomach. The words, "We may not open the door," echoed in my head. I opened the laptop again, but this time, it wasn't to scroll mindlessly through social media or check my email. It was to face the reality I had been avoiding for years. The reality of how much I had been giving, how much I'd been holding up, without ever once being asked. The screen lit up with my financial dashboard. Numbers filled the page, numbers that had become familiar over time. But now, they felt cold and impersonal. I navigated through the tabs, clicking through each one like a series of small, quiet betrayals. First, I went to Scott's development fund, $800 a month. I'd been sending him money for years, ever since he quit his full-time job to pursue his podcast and creative projects. No questions asked, no expectations of repayment. I canceled the transfer with 2 quick clicks. Next, I went to my parents' mortgage, $1,400 a month, the same amount that had been automatically deducted from my bank account for the last 5 years. I remembered the first time Dad had missed a property tax notice, and I'd quietly set up autopay to make sure they didn't lose the house. I had told myself it was temporary, that I would stop once things got better. But things never did. They never did. I clicked the button to stop the payments, and then, just like that, it was gone. I moved on to the next one, the shared Verizon plan. Dad's line was labeled secondary on my account. The text messages had always been a blur of, "Hey, can you pay the bill this month?" or "I can't afford the plan this time, could you cover it?" A quick payment here, another there. I deleted the plan entirely. The line that had been there for years, a quiet thread connecting me to a version of family I had been supporting from the shadows, was now gone. Then, I did something I had never done before. I opened a blank document and started jotting down everything I had paid for them. The laptop Scott had crashed, which I replaced with my own bonus, the root canal I paid for Mom when her dental insurance wouldn't cover it, the time I paid their missed water bill because the pipes had frozen. Each little thing, each little financial lifeline I had thrown without a second thought. It wasn't about the money, not really. It was about the fact that I'd been invisible for all these years. I wasn't even part of their story, just a shadow in the background. I had never asked for anything in return. I had only hoped that one day someone would see me. When the list reached the bottom of the page, I closed my eyes for a moment. The weight of it hit me all at once. The grief of the years I had spent invisible, the relief of finally seeing the truth for what it was. And then, without thinking, I stood up, walked over to the freezer, and placed the spiral notebook inside. I don't know why I did it. It just felt symbolic, like a way of sealing the past away. The silence of the apartment enveloped me again. And then, just as I was beginning to process what had just happened, my phone buzzed. The message read, "You've done enough damage already." It was from Scott. I stared at the screen for a long moment. The words stung, but I didn't feel angry. I didn't feel anything. I set the phone down on the table, feeling the coolness of the screen against my fingertips. I wasn't at the party, but somehow I still managed to ruin it. It was Christmas morning, and the apartment was still. The snow fell softly outside, a quiet blanket covering the world. I sat at my small kitchen table, sipping tea and reading a novel. It was a peaceful morning, but the kind of peace that felt hollow, like something important had been forgotten. I tried to get lost in the pages of the book, but it was hard to concentrate. Everything about the holiday felt wrong this year. They were all at the family house, the place I had gone to every year, even when I didn't feel wanted, the place where I had always been the dependable one, the one who cleaned up after the mess, fixed the broken things, made the food, and played the part of the perfect daughter. But this year, I wasn't there. I imagined the scene at the greenhouse, candles lit everywhere, the smell of turkey and mulled wine filling the air. The tree, probably a bit too big for the space, with its mismatched ornaments and too many lights, the chaos of relatives gathering, loud laughter, and the awkward silence between me and them, always just beneath the surface. It was all so familiar, yet this year it felt like a play I wasn't part of. Meanwhile, I sat alone, the soft jazz playing on the radio, mixing with the sound of the wind against the windows. There was no one here to argue with me, no one to tell me what I had to do. The peace was something I didn't know how to hold on to, but it was mine. At the same time, I wondered what was happening at their house. I had already heard the whispers, the hushed discussions about how things had changed, how Alyssa, Scott's girlfriend, had insisted that I not come because my energy might be too much. Maybe I had always been too much, too quiet, too intense, too invisible, too much for them to handle, yet always just enough for them to ask me to fix things. A few hours later, my phone buzzed with a notification. Alyssa had posted something on social media. Her words were vague, but the meaning hit like a ton of bricks. Sometimes the person who held the family together is the one they leave out. I read it over and over, feeling the sharp edge of her words sink deeper. There was no mention of names, no direct reference to anyone, but it was as if she had seen what I had only ever felt, the quiet absence of someone who had been pushed out. By morning, my inbox was full. Messages from distant cousins, neighbors, even people I barely knew. They were all asking the same thing. Wait, you're Scott's sister? Why weren't you there? I felt a strange mix of anger and relief. Anger because the family was now forced to face what they had so carefully ignored. Relief because I wasn't the one who had to say it. The truth had found its way out, and I didn't need to be the one to force it. As I scrolled through the messages, one stood out. An email from my mom, as expected. The subject line, "Let's reset." Things got misrepresented. I opened it without thinking. Her words were carefully chosen, polished, rehearsed. "We miss you, sweetheart. Can we move forward? Tessa still hasn't taken the post down. It's affecting Scott's brand. We really just want to fix this." There it was, the real reason. They didn't want me there, not because I had done anything wrong, but because my absence had disturbed the image they had worked so hard to maintain. They needed the lie to be quiet again. They needed me to go back to my role in their story. But this time, I didn't respond. They didn't knock like people who missed you. They knocked like people expecting a negotiation. The evening outside was quiet, the snow accumulating in soft piles on the front step. But inside my apartment, everything felt heavy. There was a flickering of light from the candles in my window, their warmth failing to push away the chill that had settled in my chest. I sat in the stillness, my fingers tracing the rim of my teacup, staring into the cold, dim reflection of the room. I wasn't surprised when I heard the knock. It wasn't a gentle knock, the kind of knock you get from someone who regrets not seeing you sooner. No, this knock was sharp, impatient, almost clinical. It wasn't a request for a reunion, it was a demand, a summons to settle a debt they had never acknowledged. I stood up slowly, a lump forming in my throat. They were outside, waiting. I hesitated before walking over to the door, staring at the brass handle for a moment before glancing through the peephole. The sight of them made something hard rise in my chest. Scott was pacing, his figure shifting from one side to the other in agitation. Mom, ever the picture of controlled warmth, adjusted her scarf, smoothing down the fabric as if everything could be fixed with just a small, practiced gesture. And Dad stood off to the side, holding a tin of cookies, his grip tight as if it were a shield, a prop to hide behind. They were so rehearsed in their roles even now. I wondered if they knew I had already made my decision, that I had already chosen to stop playing my part. I opened the door just an inch, enough to let them see me without letting them in. I stood there listening to the soft shuffle of their feet, their collective breath outside, waiting for me to say something. I could feel their expectations pressing on me, even from this small gap. Mom spoke first, her voice as syrupy as always. "Sweetheart, this isn't what anyone wanted," she began, her words winding through the air, thick and rehearsed. We didn't mean for it to get like this. You know that, don't you?" Her words had no weight, no sincerity, just words meant to fill the empty space. She didn't apologize. She didn't own the truth of what had happened. Scott chimed in, his voice low but carrying an edge. "You didn't have to go nuclear, Maya," he muttered, his words barely above a whisper. "This didn't have to be the way you handled it." I had never liked how Scott hid behind his charm, how he could twist everything into a misunderstanding and leave everyone else holding the emotional baggage. He had always been the golden child, the one who could never do anything wrong. But tonight, his guilt hung in the air, palpable, as he tried to defend what had happened. It wasn't about what I had done. It was about how they were losing control of the narrative. I stood there, not moving, not offering any reassurance. "You spent years pretending I wasn't part of this family," I said, my voice firm, each word landing with the weight of truth. "This year, you made it official." The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. Scott opened his mouth to respond, but the words never came. He swallowed hard, his face tightening, and for a split second I saw it. Guilt. Real, unspoken guilt. Mom, desperate to regain control, tried again, her voice rising slightly. "We just want to make things better, Maya. We want to move on, fix this, move past the hurt." I raised my hand, silencing her before she could finish. I wasn't angry, I wasn't hurt. I was done. "I'm not angry," I said quietly. "I'm done." The finality of the words hung in the air, and for the first time in years, I felt the weight of my own truth settle into my bones. I wasn't the one who needed to fix things. I wasn't the one who needed to apologize. They had made their choice, and so had I. I closed the door slowly, not with the force of anger, but with the finality of someone who had walked away long ago, even if they hadn't noticed. The soft click of the door shutting felt like the closing of a chapter I had been waiting to finish. It wasn't a slam. It was a full stop. I walked back into the living room, the space now quieter than before, the absence of their voices louder than any confrontation could have been. I sat back down in my chair and stared out the window. Snow still fell, soft and steady. My eyes landed on the letter Alyssa had written after her grandmother passed. I hadn't read it in a while, but something pulled me to it. I unfolded the paper, smoothing out the creases. There was a line that glowed like a lamp, bright and steady in the stillness of the room. "You reminded her she mattered. You reminded me too." I placed the letter down on the table. For the first time, I felt seen. I had mattered. Not to them, but to someone. That was enough. I never posted, never explained. But silence has a way of making noise when truth leaks through the cracks. I didn't need to say a word. The world seemed to find its own way of sharing what I hadn't. I hadn't called anyone, hadn't explained my absence, and yet my absence was louder than any apology could be. It wasn't a dramatic withdrawal, no grand gesture. It was quiet. It was the kind of absence that lingered in the air like an unfinished sentence. The first messages came the morning after, texts from cousins, neighbors, people I hadn't heard from in ages. Did something happen? Wait, you're Scott's sister? The surprise was the same in each message, a kind of disbelief, like they'd just found out I existed. It was strange, being seen in this way after so many years of being invisible, of quietly holding everything together. I leaned back in my chair at the break room, holding my phone, reading the messages one by one. They didn't know what had happened, but they had started asking the questions my family was avoiding. It wasn't long before I heard my name mentioned again, but this time it was in a different context. A colleague, someone who barely knew me beyond the office, mentioned casually one afternoon, "Your name came up recently. Apparently you flagged an insurance issue that saved someone's home." I frowned, confused for a second. What insurance issue? She noticed my puzzled look. "Oh, it was your family's case, right? The one where they almost lost the lake house? Your name popped up on the claim. You caught a mistake that would have canceled their long-term care coverage." I blinked, the realization hitting me hard. For the past few years, I had been quietly handling claims and administrative work for my family, never asking for recognition. I'd processed a claim that kept their insurance intact when their coverage had been at risk of cancellation. Without it, they would have lost the lake house to a medical lien. They'd never known I was the one who fixed it. They didn't even know I had done it. I could feel the weight of that quiet action sink in. My absence from their Christmas gathering hadn't just shocked them. It had affected their carefully constructed image of the family. They hadn't realized how much I had held together, how much I had quietly done in the background. Now, the truth was seeping out in ways they couldn't control. I turned my phone over, setting it face down on the table. It buzzed again. Another email from Mom. Tessa still hasn't taken the post down. It's hurting Scott's brand. Can we move forward? The words were sharp and clear. She wasn't concerned about me. She was concerned about how my absence was affecting the family's narrative. She needed me to clean up the mess. Again. Can we move forward? It was the same request, masked in politeness, that I had heard so many times before. They wanted things to go back to the way they had been, when I was the invisible one, the one who quietly took care of everything. But this time, I wasn't going to be invisible anymore. I had always told myself that I was helping them out of love, that they would see it eventually. But the truth was, I had been doing it out of obligation, out of a need for their recognition, even if they never gave it. I realize now that my worth wasn't just emotional, it was structural. I had held things together when they didn't know how to. They hadn't asked for my help. They hadn't seen how much I had done, but now they were asking for more. They were asking me to fix their story, to make everything right again, to go back to playing the role they had assigned me. But this time, I wasn't going to do that. I wasn't going to fix their mess for them. I wasn't going to make things easier for them. They didn't want the truth. They wanted silence. And this time, I wasn't going to give it to them. They wanted the version of me who disappeared easily. That version no longer lives here. The apartment felt quieter than usual, but not in a sad way, in the way a room feels when it's finally been cleared of everything unnecessary, the clutter of other people's expectations, the noise of their demands. There was a stillness to it now that made it feel like mine, like the space had finally settled into itself. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. The desk was tidier, the surfaces clearer. The candles I had never bothered to light were now burning softly, their light steady in the dim afternoon. A mug of hot tea sat by the window, steam rising gently, but it wasn't enough to fill the silence. The Vermont sky outside was pale gray, the snow having finally stopped falling, leaving behind a soft, reflective sheen on the streets below. It was the calm after the storm, no more distractions, no more noise. Just me and the stillness. I sat at the desk for a long time, staring at my laptop, knowing I couldn't avoid it any longer. There was one last message waiting for me, the one I had been dreading. It was from Mom. "We miss you. Can we start over? Tessa still hasn't taken it down." There was a P.S. added at the end like it was an afterthought. Scott asked me to say, "He's sorry." I didn't respond. I didn't even blink. I just closed the laptop, my fingers hovering for a moment over the keys before I gently snapped it shut. The weight of her words didn't settle in me like they used to. Instead, there was only a quiet finality to it. I had nothing left to say to them. I walked over to the wall, where the photo of me as a child still hung, the one that had been taken down from the family mantle years ago. I didn't have to look at it closely to remember the moment it was taken. Me, smiling in that blue dress, a little girl who had tried so hard to fit into a frame that was never made for her. Beside the photo, I taped the letter Alyssa had written to me after her grandmother passed. You reminded her she mattered. You reminded me, too. The words were simple, but they were everything. They were all I needed to hear. In that moment, the absence I had been carrying around for years didn't feel like a hole anymore. It felt like freedom. My phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a message from Mom. It was a notification from the hospice where I worked. A new patient had requested me by name. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my coat, slipping it on, the weight of the fabric a small comfort against the cold. I walked to the door and paused, looking out the window one last time. I had spent so many years hoping they would see me, hoping they would notice the things I did, the ways I held the family together without asking for anything in return. But they hadn't, and now I was done waiting for them to change. I stepped out into the snow without looking back. The cold air hit my face, sharp but not unwelcome. It felt like the world had exhaled with me. The silence around me wasn't empty. It was full of things I no longer needed to carry, full of a version of myself I no longer had to prove. I didn't look back as I walked into the quiet of the winter afternoon. There was no dramatic final word, no shouting, no revenge, just peace, just a clean exhale. Maya stepped out the door, not looking back, not regretting. Everything had been said, and now it was time for her to move forward, finding peace within herself. We often think love has to be proven through grand gestures, but sometimes silence is the strongest affirmation. If we learn to listen and recognize each other in truth without the need for apologies, just quiet respect, we understand the value of what's left unsaid. If this story touched you, feel free to share your thoughts and let the story continue to spread, gently and warmly, like silent but steady footsteps.